You're listening to a 5 Live boxing special. In the wake of Ricky Hatton's cocaine abuse, we're discussing the problems that face fighters when they leave the ring. Richie Woodhall, Mike Costello and Steve Bunce are my guests. Mike, just listening to what Richie was saying before the news, it sounds like he's almost unique in being able to quit boxing at the right time, walk away from it and stay on the rails as well.
Yes, he is, especially somebody who reached the heights that he did. And I picked up on 2 points that he made there. He said that when he walked away, he was 31, 32, which is precisely the age that Hatton is now. And he also spoke about that night when he won the title, and he knew then that nothing in his career would ever be the same again. And I wonder whether Hatton still reflects back to the night in June 2005 when he beat Costello at the MEN Arena in Manchester. It was one of the great nights in the history of British boxing. And it's clear that Hatton hasn't been the same since, for whatever reason. That was his Everest that night, just as it was Richie's in Telford all those years
ago. It must be very
earlier.
hard, Richie, to think, that you've peaked in your 20s in some ways.
Yes, but I remember Ricky Hatton, actually when I won the title back in March 98, I think Ricky was having his 4th or 5th contest, and I know that he knocked a guy out in the first round. So, and I always remember a couple of my mates afterwards, the next day or whatever, when I spoke to my friends and they were congratulating me, they said, "Hey, who's this kid from Manchester?" I said, "Who's that?" He says, "A lad called Ricky Hatton." He said, knocked him out in the first round. So, he was making waves then, believe you me. And he has been a tremendous fighter, Ricky, and I'm sure he will come back from this.
What was the lowest point for you, Richie, after you stopped?
The lowest point for me was probably having to accept, like I said, that I couldn't train as hard as I wanted to. And that was due to injury and due to age. I knew that I couldn't train, I couldn't run as fast. I was having every time I ran, I was having real bad back pains in my lower back, and I basically went to a specialist and I had 2 cracks in my lower spine, and that was caused through just continuously running on hard roads, because I would run 6 days a week, always on roads, and having to accept that I couldn't do the training anymore, believe you me. That for me was that I couldn't. I had to accept it, but it was extremely difficult. That was probably the lowest point.
Rich, what about in the last 11 or 12 years, mate, when you and I have been driving up the motorway and without mentioning channels and whatnot, and suddenly we're looking at a really empty diary for the next 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months. Now, for me as a quotes unquote professional broadcaster, those have been fairly low. But for you, as a former athlete, just about making your name in the broadcaster business. I mean, that must have been low for you, Rich. I mean,
yeah, that's been low
some
as
of those
well.
days.
Yeah.
So.
Steve, you're spot on. Once you walk away from the game, you're quickly forgotten, and it does hurt. Of course, it hurts. But yeah, you're overlooked, and other people get gigs and commentary jobs in front of you, and you think, well, you should be doing it, and why aren't they picking me? Maybe I'm no good. I don't know, but yeah, it does hurt because, like I said, once you walk away from boxing, you're very, very quickly not ignored as such, but in a way you're sort of forgotten.
Yeah, but here again, you see, Hatton isn't going to face that kind
any
of problem.
of those
he
problems.
Could walk into any commentary job. And the thing is also with Hatton, we were talking about this again a couple of weeks ago, and we were wondering whether this would be enough to fill this void. I mean, Barry McGuigan has spoken about it, coincidentally, as being the adulation being like a Class A drug. Now, I was in Newcastle in December of last year. It was the build-up to Amir Khan's fight against Dimitri Salita.
Yep.
And during the week at the Civic Hall there, Hatton spoke in front of, I think, about 400 people in the main hall there. And just as he was being introduced, they all rose. Before he'd said a word, all of them rose to their feet and started singing There's Only One Ricky Hatton.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, at least he's got something to replace what he got in the ring. Now, I know he hasn't got to step up into the ring, he hasn't done the training and all of that.
He'll always be loved, though, won't he?
And he does a lot of those.
He's still got that love.
And he does a lot of those nights, and I've done quite a few with him, and Richie's done a lot with him as well. And you have to understand, Al, I go on and I could tell a half-decent joke, and I could tell a story, and I'll get a ripple. Ricky goes on and he says, all right, the place goes mad.
Let's talk now
it's degrees of adulation that are really hard.
Steve, we're going to talk now to Robert Smith, who's General Secretary of the British Boxing Board of Control. Good evening to you, Robert.
Good evening.
Let's talk first of all about Ricky Hatton, and what was your reaction? What was the board's reaction when you saw what was in the papers last Sunday?
Oh, extremely sad. I mean, I've only spoken to the chairman and a couple of the stewards of the board. We haven't had a meeting since, but, we're talking about somebody who's brought a great deal of joy to the sport. The people watching him had been a great role model. and brought people into the sport. And for this to happen is extremely sad on a individual note, really.
Have you had any contact with anyone in the Hatton camp?
Yes, I've spoken to his father on a couple of occasions. I've spoken to his solicitor, etc. And yes, we've kept in contact to see how things are going on.
Are you in a difficult position here? Because, as you say, everyone feels this great sense of sadness that he's come so low. But at the same time, what he's doing is effectively illegal, isn't it? So, I mean, are you looking at measures to help him or sanctions against him?
Well, both.
It's a difficult one. We're arranging to meet Ricky as soon as we possibly can. Obviously, the situation where he is at the moment makes it quite difficult, and logistics of getting everybody together. But we will be talking to Ricky and his party fairly soon. I think the first and foremost is a human story. I mean, this is just sad. I mean, I was hearing about earlier, listening to the story to your piece earlier. I mean, Ricky is not a boxer. We mustn't. I keep hearing that Ricky is a boxer. He's got a license. He hasn't got a license. He's actually paid a license fee, but there are many things other than a license fee you have to be a boxer. He's not an active boxer. He couldn't box tomorrow. He's still suspended from his Pacquiao fight. So the boxing license issue is not an issue. But he does have other licenses. He's a manager, he's a second, he's a promoter. And these are the sort of things that we have to discuss when we all get together to see how he is and see how we feel it needs to go on.
Mike, what are the precedents here? I mean, what kind of treatment could he expect from the board?
Well, 6 or 7 years ago, the former British light heavyweight champion Tony Aoki was suspended for cocaine use and was banned for a year, I believe, Robert, and fined around £3,000. So that is one precedent, yeah.
That's correct.
And a time before that, Nicky Booth had a problem in a crack house when he was addicted to crack and went to prison and was stripped of his licence whilst he was in prison, and he struggled to, I think, unsuccessfully failed to ever get a meeting with you. So there are.
Well, first of all, he was convicted of a very serious offence.
Absolutely.
Nobody's been convicted here at all. This is a story, and we have to deal with the story. So once we get them all to get everybody together and see and discuss the situation, we'll be in a better position.
And Robert, what about the whole business of actually helping boxers when they retire? I mean, you look at the example of the PFA in football, who look after footballers' careers when they have to stop playing for injury or just through retirement. Is there a way that the board can help people, or should there be an independent body that can help boxers to find a life outside the ring?
Well, this is a very difficult thing because ultimately it's an individual choice. I mean, you're dealing with adults. I mean, I was listening to Richie earlier, and Richie's a very sensible man. I mean, one thing that he did say that really stuck with me was, you're talking about, and it's not just boxers, it's all sportsmen. You retire at 28, 29, 30. It's the first part of your phase of your life. And the word retirement is quite a daunting thing. And you have to go and find something else to do. And most of the individuals or the young men and women that we deal with have done nothing else. They've gone from school, they're all going to be world champions in their head, and unfortunately only a very few, lucky few like Richie and Ricky, have fulfilled their ambition. The rest of the boys have to go and get jobs and do things like that. And ultimately, the best advice we give people, when every boxer has to be interviewed for a licence, and the best bit of advice we give them, I believe, is make sure you have another job. Boxing is pin money, really. 98% of the boxers or people in the sport don't make any money. It's only the lucky few who make money. Lucky few who can keep hold of it because you're retired a long, long time. But you have to have something else to do, and I think that's half the problem. As we were talking about adulation that Ricky has had, and the promoting and the seconding hasn't really fulfilled what he had before, and you have to find something else to fulfil that. And as a young man, that's a very difficult thing to do.
Rob, could I ask you this? During the last, say, 4 or 5 years, when us in the media, and probably we might have even been guilty on this show, have made light of his drinking and his ballooning in weight, could I ask you if the board has ever approached him to question him about his quote-unquote boozing lifestyle?
No, I've never been involved with any discussions with regard to that. Maybe my predecessor Simon Block may have done, but I've never done that. The only thing I would say is that we obviously have a strict regime of check weights, etc. And I will say that you hear all the stories, you hear this and that, but when he started training, he trained extremely hard. He lived properly. And I would honestly say, hand on heart, Ricky and Joe Calzaghe are the most weight check boxers we've ever had in Great Britain. because obviously the stories are ballooning in weight.
Do you know what, Robert? That's kind of something that concerns me about the longer term prognosis for Ricky Hatton, because I was looking at his record since he won the title in 2005, so just over 4 years since then. He's boxed an average of twice a year. Now, he went into camp for a fight 12 weeks beforehand. In other words, 3 months before a fight. Now, if he's fighting twice a year, that's 6 months in camp. That's 6 months of very healthy living. So in a sense, that offset whatever he did in his downtime. And that's my fear, that now that he doesn't have those fights to punctuate the bad living, that's to me going to be something really difficult for him to deal with.
Yeah. I agree with you, Mike. I really do agree with you. We mustn't forget. I mean, you know, this is a bad story, it's a bad experience, but we have some very good stories as well. There are other sports. I mean, boxers are no different from any other sportsman. I mean, there are many sportsmen who's gone down the same road as Ricky, which is a great shame in what they're doing. I mean, we also have some wonderful success stories where boxers have walked away. Richie Woodhall, you're talking to, is one of the best stories we have, and we don't seem to push on to that too much. We always go on the negatives, which is really sad.
Well, in all fairness, on this show in the last 6 years, we really don't go on to the negatives. We go on to the positives. If you read the tabloids, then you only go on to the negatives, and that's not a criticism. That's a fact. Well, what I'm concerned about is that someone's going to look at it, someone's going to analyse it, and someone's going to say, do you know Ricky Hatton's gained and lost 140 stone in the last 10 years, and they're going to produce pictures, and there'll be a picture 1995 fat Ricky, 1996 fat Ricky, and the question mark at the top of the piece is, why didn't somebody do something? I'm only preempting what would be a follow-up if I was an editor in a newspaper. Well, that's why I asked you that question, if you know over the last 6 or 7 years if anybody has ever said, Rick, this drinking stuff, mate, it's all very well. We all like a booze. I like a booze, you like a booze, Rob, and Mike and I love a pint together. Ellie and I have a sherry. We all like a booze, but we're talking here about what we've all suddenly become geniuses since that beautifully placed camera last week in that hotel room in Altrincham. But perhaps I'm not blaming you under any circumstances, Rob. Perhaps we should have, probably all of us, should have maybe stepped back a bit earlier.
Well, maybe that's true, Steve, but it's a very difficult thing to do, as you know, dealing with adults. I mean, you know, he's a father, he's an adult. He it's up to him. You can speak to anybody as much as you want to. Whether they listen to you is a different thing altogether. But yes, I mean, you may be right. I don't know what anybody else around him said. I've spoken to many people this week who have criticised how everybody's done things and given advice what they should do, but ultimately it's up to Ricky himself. And you said a thing about addicts earlier, going so deep down in the depths of despair, etc. It is the individual themselves. If they want to get out of it, they've got to do it themselves. You can talk to them as much as you want.
Can I bring Richie back in on this? Because Richie, we sort of, you've got lost slightly in this discussion with Robert, but I mean, Richie, when you were boxing, if anyone had said to you, look, just from outside your camp, do this differently, don't do this, don't do that. I mean, is the problem that actually it's very difficult to tell somebody in such an individual sport how to lead their lives?
Well, I mean, of course, people do try and give you advice and tell you different things, but I always knew my own body, and I certainly wasn't one for going drinking in between fights. And what I would say about Ricky, obviously people forget that when he does go into training, Stevie said it and Robert Smith said as well, that he goes in 12 to 16 weeks he goes into training camp, and he trains extremely hard. But what I would say, in between those fights, like Mike has said, the drinking binges that he went on, I think, certainly have contributed to his career ending quicker than what it should have done. Because at the end of the day, we always used to say at the ringside, you can't keep going to the well and drawing on the well the way he was doing and performing at that highest level. And I think the drinking binges in between fights have definitely contributed to his decline as a fighter. And he's definitely declined. And it's positive, I think, in my opinion, what Robert Smith's saying there, that he's far away from ever boxing again, because he has to go through a series of a process, and I think that's very, very wise.
Robert, thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening. Really appreciate it.
No problem.
Thanks, Robert.
Thanks, Robert.
Robert, General Secretary of the British Boxing Board of Control.